Alrighty everyone, welcome to topic 4. We're going to be talking about entering the police force and just a random couple issues related to that. Some of you might want to become police officers, some of you might not. But whether you want to become a police officer or not, it's still important to know some of the vibes of becoming a cop. I'll try to make this a shorter video again. Alright, what are some of the minimum qualifications? Now, one thing you must understand is that not every jurisdiction is the same. Remember we talked about fragmentation? Yeah! So, there are some issues here. Meaning that some police agencies have certain qualifications while others have different ones. So what we're looking at here is just sort of like overall, what are the qualification minimums? Alright? Most places you need to be 21. I know there are a handful of places where 18, 20, 19 work, but for the most part you need to be 21. So for those of you in college, it's not a big deal because most of you will be graduated by the time you're 21 and then can go straight into the police force. There used to be minimum height requirements, but research has shown that height doesn't have much to do with your ability to control someone or work your job or you know, be a good police officer. So this has been challenged by lawsuits. There used to be a BMI issue, like your weight has to be proportional to your height, and some agencies will still enforce something like that. You can't be completely out of shape if you want to become a police officer, because even though policing is becoming less and less physically demanding, you still need to be able to run. When you can, you still need to be able to keep up with some of these folks. You know, when someone is jacked up on methamphetamine, they're going to be super strong for a little bit, or even PCP. So you have to be able to have some ability to control people who've gotten out of hand physically. And so some agencies will have fast and loose physical requirements, but a lot of them had been challenged in the courts, and so there had been some amendments made. But I think the most important thing that irritates me is that not every police agency has the same educational requirements. Some agencies, you just sort of need to be able to breathe, and then you can become a police officer, or you need to have a high school diploma, while other places like Fairfax County, Virginia, would require you to have a college degree. But most places, I think at this point in time, need you to have like 60 credits of college. But unfortunately, one of the things that police agencies look for the most is people who have military experience. And I understand the importance of that coming from a police academy and training standpoint, but I don't know how good that is necessarily when it comes to de-escalation tactics and so forth. You can't have any felony or major drug offenses. Now, since marijuana has been legalized, some agencies have been relaxing some of these things. Also, we're currently experiencing a major dip or lull in people who want to become police officers. One of the reasons being the amount of scrutiny that police officers have been receiving on social media. And you know, if you're a police officer and you get fired, right, that's your whole career. It's done. So now you got to look for a new career. And so people are realizing that, and this is not a job for them. Also remember, we do not pay our police officers well enough. Like, kind of like teachers, right? We in America, we don't seem to really care about public servants. If you look across all public service sectors, we don't care about them, right? And we don't, and the best way we show that we don't care about them is with how little we pay them. Imagine this: a police officer versus a medical doctor. The only difference between them is that a medical doctor has a scalpel and some equipment, but they hold life and death in people's, in their hands. Well, police officers do the same thing. Not only do they hold your physical life, in their hands, but they also hold your civil life, meaning your freedom, in their hands. Yet we pay doctors a boatload more than we pay police officers. And at the same time, we have much stricter standards for how doctors must operate than police officers. We also require doctors to go to school for a very, very long time, but we don't do that of police officers. I think personally that it's time to view police officers like we would view doctors, and pay them like we would pay doctors, and hold them accountable like we would hold accountable doctors. In the end, it's about, are we buying good cops, or are we buying cheap cops? Currently, we're buying cheap cops, and no one wants to become a cop, or no one who has the ability to be a great police officer wants to become a police officer anymore. And that is sad. So you can't have any felony charges for obvious reasons. You can't have major drug offenses. Like I had a past student who did not get a job because they sold Adderall to somebody during exam week, right? And that came out during a polygraph. And we'll talk about polygraphs later. Depending on what kind of misdemeanors you have, that will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. And then there's also some residency and citizenship requirements. One of the reasons that I am not a police officer is because I did not get my U.S. citizenship until I was 27 years old, right? So I got my degree, and my bachelor's degree, when I was 23, and then I got a master's degree when I was 25, and then at that point I could not join any sort of the law enforcement or even many public agencies, and as a consequence I decided to get a PhD, and now I am here. And I am glad I didn't become a police officer, because I think I would have gotten fired quite quickly. I have a knack for popping off at people. Alright, so the process of becoming a police officer can take anywhere from a year to about 6 months. You have to go through all kinds of interviews and exams and background checks and all this stuff. And so the whole process will take a very, very long time. So if you are over 21 at the moment, you're looking at the end of college here in the next year, maybe you're a junior, maybe you're a first semester senior, and you want to become a police officer, I would begin that application process immediately. You'll go through myriad oral and written interviews. You'll meet with, it depends on the jurisdiction, but sometimes you'll meet with a subcommittee within city government that will talk to you. You will meet with civil rights people, depending on the jurisdiction. You'll meet with police staff, and they'll ask you all kinds of questions. You'll have to respond to them. And, you know, they don't just look for the answers, like the content of your answers, but they also look for your tone and your overall demeanor. You'll then also have to go through medical exams. People with certain allergies might be flagged, certain heart conditions, or other types of medical conditions. They also want to make sure that you're in shape. Right? I think most police agencies require you to be able to run a mile in 13 minutes, which is pretty easy. A mile in 13 minutes would be like you'd be jogging, and then you could probably walk for like 2 or 3 or 0.2 or 3 miles, and you'll still hit that 13-minute mark. So it doesn't really require a lot of you. Then there's a lot of psychological evaluations. We want to make, you know, the police want to make sure that they have somebody who's not going to all of a sudden have a mental breakdown when they're dealing with a situation. You know, and police officers have to handle some very traumatic things. You know, and that, again, one of the reasons why I'm glad I didn't become a police officer, because I don't know how I would handle seeing, you know, a person who's dying from stab wounds, and you gotta have some psychological strength for that kind of stuff. And I don't know if I could handle that. You know, so you need to think to yourself, you're probably gonna see a lot of dead bodies, and you're gonna see a lot of people who've died in ways that, you know, aren't peacefully dying on their deathbed. You know, people who die in gruesome ways. People who are young who are dying. you know, and so that's something that you're going to have to see as a police officer, and you need to be strong for that. So only about a quarter of police agencies do the polygraphs. Polygraphs they serve two purposes. They want to make sure that there are no real bad skeletons in your closet, but they also want to make sure that you are telling them the truth, right? Because the police, you know, they investigate things, right? They're really good at investigating things. They will find some skeletons in your closet. And so they want to make sure that if they ask you things like, you know, have you used racial slurs in the last 3 years, right? Then you got to tell them, yes, I made this joke, or I said this thing. Have you sold drugs ever in your life? Yes, I sold some Adderall to somebody in college, or yeah, I sold weed for a while to make some money. What kind of websites are you looking at, right? I know, like I said, I knew that student didn't get a job, even though they said during the polygraph that they had sold Adderall, but it was too close in proximity. Another student pretty much had to tell the police chief of a certain agency who was of a minority group that he had made pretty bad racial slurs about that particular group, you know, not long ago. And, you know, that came out in the polygraph, and they're like, this was too recent for us to trust you. Another person that I know did not get a job with the FBI, or maybe it was somewhere else in the DOJ, where they admitted to going to certain websites and looking at certain things online that are not too kosher, and did not get a job. So I would be very careful if you want to become a police officer, right? And you're a freshman or maybe a sophomore in college. I would consider being careful of what websites you're visiting. Be careful of what drugs you're doing, how much drinking you're getting involved in, taking performance-enhancing academic drugs like Adderall, Vyvanse, Ritalin. Unless you have a prescription, I wouldn't be messing around with those things. All right, don't sell drugs. Just stay away from anything nefarious. Moreover, social media accounts. Like I have a friend, she's just been hired as a police officer, and they literally took her phone and they downloaded everything that was on her phone, checking out her social media. They looked at pictures that was being sent back and forth between, you know, significant others. And now they were able to see some things that were damning, but they noticed, okay, this is just your sort of average slight deviance, right? You maybe send a racy picture to your significant other. That's not gonna get you fired. But if you're sending racist memes to people left and right, if you are texting things about, oh, I hate this, I hate that, or, you know, you're very political on social media or in your text messages, they're gonna catch that. And they don't want someone that's volatile as a police officer. They don't want someone who has negative views towards a certain racial group. They don't want someone who has negative views towards the LGBTQ plus community, or Democrats or Republicans, right? If you become a police officer, someone who has to uphold the law, you need to be as middle of the road and as innocuous as possible. You don't want to hire someone who has their own agenda. So they check with your previous employers. You know, I have so many cops calling me asking about students who have applied to become state troopers or whatnot. You're gonna go through a long process, and make sure you keep your nose clean now, so that when all kinds of things happen, when they start digging into your background and all that stuff. So affirmative action is an important thing in the policing today, because you might as well, you know, the police has been predominantly white males for a very long time, and the U.S. society that we're policing is not just a bunch of white males, and that demographic. Things are changing, and the police need to change as well. So what the affirmative action laws require of people is that they take a census of their employees, they figure out where they have underutilization, and then figure out a recruiting plan that helps them address that underutilization. Typically, you want to have a police agency that reflects the people, right? Because if you have police officers who can understand the contextual backgrounds of everyone that they're policing, right? They can make better decisions. They can understand when someone doesn't look you in the eye, or when someone doesn't want to give you a firm handshake, right? Or when someone doesn't call you sir or ma'am, like they will understand, okay, this is not a sign of disrespect. It is just a different subcultural way of interacting or of communicating. So what are the goals of diversity? Well, like I said, people from different backgrounds can get along with people with clientele from different backgrounds. I mean, look at the Ferguson, Missouri Police Department, right? That jurisdiction works predominantly with a African-American / black community, but like 90-something% of their department is white males, right? So you have I mean, just imagine what that looks like for a second, right? Given the historical context of our country, all right? Considering that 250 years ago, black people were severely oppressed by white people. And now you live in a community with predominantly black people around you, but the police force is all a bunch of white folks, right? That, from an overall optics point of view, looks bad to begin with. But then from a social relational point of view, it is even worse, because people are not from the same subculture. There are little nuanced differences in the way that people interact, the way that people show deference, and these things can sometimes exacerbate existing tensions. Right? When there's this ignorance and confusion and misunderstanding in a tense situation, it can make things difficult. So bringing people in from myriad backgrounds, myriad perspectives, brings new views and approaches that can help soften the tension between the community and the police. We might as well call the police the brolies, because for the longest time, it's been viewed as a man's job. It's been predominantly a man's job. Most police officers are males, right? And women have had a tough time getting into the police and sort of dealing with all the BS of police officers, right? So, for instance, if you look at like the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, right, a lot of women were subject to discrimination. Like, you'd become a police officer, you'd be put immediately on some sort of desk duty, or you'd be severely verbally and like harassed by the male police officers, right? When you speak to any woman police officer who served, especially in the 80s, right, they'll tell you, yeah, you gotta have a tough skin, because these guys will make some pretty sexually explicit jokes about you. They will make jokes about your femininity. They will treat you like you can't protect yourself, right? And that requires you to have a pretty thick skin. Now, over time, that's become considered extremely inappropriate, and it's been disciplined now, and so you don't see as much of this discrimination and prejudice in like that is overt like that in police agencies anymore. And women are becoming more and more prevalent among police officers, right? They're still very much underrepresented, especially when it comes to command roles, right? The brass. But that is slowly but surely changing, right? Some of the things that would prevent women from becoming police officers was the upper body physical strength tests, right? Now, research has shown that your upper body physical strength does not impact your ability to be a good police officer. And so some of those requirements have now been changed or amended, and women are making it into the police more regularly. Why do we need women? Well, we know that women are far less likely to use physical force than male officers are. They're more likely to resort to using their verbal command of people to diffuse a situation. We see that especially educated women are way, and what I mean by educated women is women with bachelor's degrees, are way better at diffusing situations and not having to rely on deadly force or even less lethal force. They also are vital in situations where women were the victims of sexual crimes or intimate partner violence crimes. Also, when it comes to children's crimes or sexual crimes against children, women tend to be more empathetic in the way they approach those victims and can be pretty useful at getting the proper evidence from those victims without causing secondary trauma. Also, more importantly, women are more open to change when it comes to innovation and change in police agencies. Remember, innovation is very important. If police agencies don't change and society changes, well, at some point there will be a clash. So once police agencies embrace innovation, they stand to have a better relationship with their immediate community. And research finds that women are more inclined to embrace change. So when it comes to police training, there are 4 types of training. You have the police academy. That's when you start they call that pre-service training. So before you actually are out on the street, busting crimes and taking names or whatever, you have to go through a certain amount of training, and we're going to cover this. Field training, that's when remember we talked about those special units like FTOs or field training officers? Well, once you get out of the academy, you as a new police officer will partner up with another patrol officer who's considered to be a master crafts officer. What I mean by that is they're a master artisan of being a police officer. They're known as a good police officer. And so you will then team up with them. They will give you some feedback on what to do, how to approach certain situations, so that they know that you can be good on your own. And then there's also this periodic in-service training that all officers must do. So this involves a classroom portion and then a scenario portion, meaning that you're learning some things in the class and then you have to go practice that in scenarios. So this might be pulling somebody over who gets violent with you and how to de-escalate that situation. It might be a mass shooting situation. It might, it could be any type of situation. And so in-service training, make sure that police officers are sharp. And, because, look, you're not going to get a mass shooting more than, once every maybe 20, 30 years in your jurisdiction. So your police officers aren't going to have a lot of practice with that. So in-service training allows you to practice what to do in those situations. Because if you ask any police officer, what gets you through a situation, and they say, not thinking about the situation and just falling back on my training, right? They have a deep faith in their training. And so you have to reinforce that on a consistent basis. Then remedial training is when you've gotten into some sort of trouble and you have, you've done something like you did not properly use force during a situation. You struggled to get your firearm out when the situation called for it, or you did something that wasn't appropriate according to the departmental guidelines, and now you need to be trained on that again to make sure that you meet those standards. So that's called remedial training. So in the academy, again, that's where new recruits sort of receive this introduction of what the realities of police work are. You go through sort of basic training on what the law and policies After officer, you get trained on when to use force, what the appropriate use of force is, and then also how to handle arrests and booking. You usually will do about 1,400 hours, but it depends again on the jurisdiction. And then if your performance during the academy training is not satisfactory, you are fired or just let go. And usually about 14% of cadets are sort of washed out during the academy training. All right, so we're going to end this here. Make sure that you read the textbook chapter so that you are, so that you get access to all of the information that's in the chapter. Because again, I don't cover everything in the textbook. It is your responsibility to make sure you read the book. All right. With that being said, email me with any questions and chill vibes.